Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D. for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. I wanted to draw a connection between Bundism and Maoism-Third Worldism. Bundism is a new term to me. I've only heard of it in the last few months, and I suspect that the reason why is because of the dominance of Zionism in global Jewry. I never learned of it when I was a kid in Hebrew school. I've never heard about it discussed in the media. It is pretty much kept silent for some reason by certain people. People who should be talking about it are not talking about it. And I suspect because they don't want to talk about it, that's usually why people don't talk about things, because they choose not to. Okay, so for me, Bundism is a pathway to understanding Maoism-Third Worldism more than I did before. Now, let me clarify that. I did not come to Maoism-Third Worldism through Bundism. I was already a Maoist Third Worldist. But learning about Bundism after I was already a Maoist Third Worldist has given me a new appreciation for Maoism-Third Worldism. Why? Well, I am from a Jewish family, although a non-practicing Jewish family. My family really did nothing that was reasonably considered to be Jewish, except when I was a kid. We did light the Hanukkah candles, although they were the electric bulbs. We also had Passover Seders, I think, 3 times, maybe 4 times when I was a little kid. I remember I loved horseradish. And so, since then, I have always loved horseradish. But in terms of actually celebrating or commemorating Jewish festivals like Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, the high holy days of Judaism, no, we didn't do that. We did not belong to a Jewish temple, synagogue, community center, whatever you want to call it. I never really had any connection with any Jewish community center. The only time I did was when I was bar mitzvahed. But the Hebrew school I went to, as I've mentioned before, was held in an extension to this guy's home right near where I used to live in Bayside, Queens. And he was a nice guy, Joel Bernstein, but he never told us anything about Bundism either. We did learn about Zionism, but not about Bundism. And he was a nice guy. I like Joel. He taught me basic Hebrew, which has stayed with me to this day. That is to say, basic Hebrew has stayed with me to this day. And it has also helped me learn Arabic, which I'm grateful for. Arabic and Hebrew, if you don't know, are relatively similar languages. They're both Semitic languages, and there are certain cases where the words are almost identical. So they're, learning Hebrew as a kid, I can say it was my second language, but that's really, in a sense, an exaggeration because I never learned to speak Hebrew, only to read it to an extent, not to write it and not to converse in it. Nevertheless, I am grateful to what Joel did. I'm happy that I had that early exposure to Judaism, although when I went home, my family did not practice Judaism. We ate pork on a regular basis, ham and eggs typically every morning. So again, we were not a religious Jewish family by any stretch of the imagination. But Bundism, which I have developed an appreciation for, only having known about it for the last few months, has given me a new way to understand Maoism Third Worldism that I didn't have before. Okay, we've talked about Bundism a bit in this podcast. Basically, Bundism has been revived by Abraham Weisfeld and others. Abraham lives in Montreal, Canada. Very nice guy. I've gotten to know him fairly well. I enjoy chatting with him. Nice guy, you know, nice fellow to talk with, very educated, also very courageous. He is perhaps one of the most, if not the most, courageous people I've ever known. He will, or he would, cross over from Israel into the Palestinian territories and join together with his Palestinian brethren and protest against the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. So he's very brave, a lot braver than I am. I don't think that I would have the courage to do what Abraham did. He can't do that right now because, as I've mentioned before, he is being charged with a criminal offense in Canada for writing graffiti, on a Zionist sign. I never knew that Zionism was powerful in Canada. I always knew it was powerful here in the US, not in Canada. Now I know. What a shame. Abraham did nothing wrong. Well, nothing legally wrong. Now, certainly if the person who owned the sign wanted to press civil charges against him for some unknown reason, I suppose that would be reasonable. But pressing criminal charges against him for graffiti? I never heard of such a thing. I mean, Canada is not my country. I am an American, but still, just the idea of being charged with a felony for graffiti is unimaginable to me. And yet that is precisely what has happened to Abraham Weisfeld. And now I personally don't think that the charges will stick. That's my guess. I think that it will be thrown out of court. If not, as I've said in previous podcasts, the judge will become the laughingstock of the judicial world, in my opinion. Again, I don't know. I am speaking as an amateur. I am a sociologist, not a lawyer, but still, it seems inconceivable to me that a judge would convict someone of a crime for writing graffiti. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. It's possible. I've been wrong before, many times, but it still does not seem conceivable to me that he will be convicted of a crime for writing graffiti on a Palestinian sign. That is really, really odd. Seems kind of difficult to wrap my head around that idea. Nevertheless, the point of this podcast is to show how, at least for me, Bundism, the Bund, has become a pathway for me to approach Maoism-Third Worldism. Now, as I said, I was a Maoist Third Worldist before hearing about the Bund. So I did not become a Maoist Third Worldist through Bundism. And I would assume that not all people in the Bund are Maoist Third Worldists. But for me, the Bund is a really, really good approach to understanding Maoism Third Worldism and its implications for Jews. Why? Well, because Bundism focuses on the Palestinians. The Palestinians, by definition, whether on the West Bank or the Golan Heights they are third worlders. They are third worlders by definition. They live in the third world. Israel is not a third world country. It is a first world country, and it is because of Israel that Palestine has not become an independent nation itself. That is entirely of Israel's own doing. Israel does not want Palestine to become a country. And now, as I'm sure you know, currently, as of right now, in March of 2024, Benjamin Netanyahu is conducting a terrorist campaign in Gaza and is trying to crush the Gazans, and has basically confined the Gazans to a small area of Gaza called Rafah. He has placed so many people there, too many people really, to fit in the small area called Rafah. That is clearly his intention. I suspect that he is trying to drive them into Egypt, even though the Egyptians have made clear that they will not accept the Gazans into Egypt. The Jordanians have made similar statements. So literally, the Gazans have no place to go. I have no idea what will happen. What I do know is that global opinion has been shifting. In the past, Israel was viewed rather favorably by the world, including by most Americans. I would say very sadly, not by me, but by most Americans. Now, that is no longer the case. Very rapidly, the tide of American public opinion has been shifting against both Israel and its current prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who is now in his third term as prime minister. After he is no longer prime minister, he will most likely face war crimes charges, which have nothing to do with this particular event, but which relate to previous terrorist acts, or I guess I should say alleged terrorist acts, which were committed by Benjamin Netanyahu in the Palestinian territories. So for me, when I look at Gaza and the Palestinian territories in general as a part of the third world, I see my connection with them. I see them as my brethren, as a way to approach Maoism-Third worldism that is connected with my Semitic ancestry. So even though I am not from a religious Jewish background, still, I am Semitic. I am Semitic. And the Gazans are also Semitic. And most Israelis are Semitic as well. The level of Zionism in Israel is very high. The level of Zionism among American Jews is also relatively high, but nowhere near as high as it is among Israeli Jews. So the opinion of Jews around the world is rapidly shifting against Israel. And Benjamin Netanyahu knows that, as do the other people in his regime. And even Joe Biden, who has been the primary financier and the primary provider of military aid to Israel, has begun, I think, under political pressure, to begin applying some pressure, certainly not enough, but some pressure to Netanyahu to stop or at least scale back the level of military expeditions that Netanyahu is carrying out in Gaza, I think it is doubtful whether Netanyahu will respond favorably. Honestly, the only thing I think that the US can do or could do that would stop Netanyahu in his tracks would be three things. First, to stop providing financial aid to Israel. Second, to stop providing military aid to Israel. And third, to demand that Israel stop its terrorist campaign in Gaza. I don't like the idea of US imperialism, that the US would demand another country to do what it wants. But considering that the US has been funding Israel and is the primary supporter of Israel, including in the UN, by vetoing most condemnations historically of Israel in the UN Security Council, I think in this case, I am willing to make an exception. And I do think that it would be justifiable for the US to make that kind of demand to Israel to stop its terrorist campaign in Israel. I do think that that Netanyahu would, however reluctantly, listen if Biden made that demand. If Biden cut back on financial and military aid to Israel. I do think so. Could I be wrong? Oh, yeah, I could be wrong. I've been wrong many times before. And I certainly would not doubt that I could be wrong in this case as well. I would hope not, but certainly that is possible. But will the US do that? Will Biden actually do that? So far, we have seen no clear indications from Biden that he plans to demand, with an emphasis on demand, that Netanyahu stop his terrorist campaign in Israel. I should say in Gaza, not in Israel. So, such is the state of the world. We have a first world country, Israel, a part of the American empire, or the empire for short, which is engaged in the Holocaust of the 21st century, a genocide on Gaza. How the US could do this is unimaginable to me. But then again, how Israel could do what it's doing, given the fact that Jews were subject to the great Holocaust of the 20th century under Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich, that is even more unimaginable to me, but yet it's happening. It makes no sense, and I don't understand why 80% of Israeli Jews support this terrorist act. I don't understand it. The only explanation I can think of is space. Israel needs space. Israel is running out of space, which is why it keeps on building settlements in the occupied territories. If it were to take control of Gaza, which I don't really think it can, for a variety of reasons, because whatever Netanyahu may do, he cannot kill the spirit of the Palestinian people. But regardless, Israel needs space. If it were successful in gaining control of Gaza, it would have a lot more space. A lot more space. How long that would last, I don't know. But it would certainly last them for a while. Already Israel is really overcrowded. More overcrowded, I believe, than even Japan. And Japan is a very overcrowded country as well. So, to me, the Bund, an anti-Zionist approach to Jewry or Judaism, is a way, one way for me, to approach Maoism-Third worldism. As a guy from a Jewish background, even though I left the religion of Judaism when I was 14 years old, I still regard the Bund with a great deal of love, because I can see how, at least in the case of the Bund, many Jews are coming to the rescue of their Palestinian brethren. And if there is any time where the Palestinians have needed rescue, it is now. It is now. Whether that will be sufficient, only time will tell. I don't know. I hope so. But Bundism, sadly, is a relatively small movement. There are also other anti-Zionist Jewish movements, including right here in the US and to a lesser extent in Israel. But they are also relatively small. There aren't that many Jews proportionately who oppose Zionism. And that makes it a very difficult thing to imagine that Jews, or I should say Israelis in this case, will stop its terrorist exercises in Gaza. I certainly hope so. Do I believe it will happen? To be honest, no. But then again, I am not a pessimistic man. I should say I am not an optimistic man. I am a pessimistic man. I am by disposition pessimistic. I wish I were not. I suppose it is the result of my life, which has been filled with a lot of tragedy, personal tragedy, as a result of my autism. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope that my pessimism is misguided. And I hope that Israel will somehow come to its senses, whether by pressure or by a change in government, to stop what it is currently doing in Gaza. Again, I don't think that will happen. At least I don't think that it will happen willingly, meaning I don't think that Netanyahu will willingly do that. I don't. And given the fact that 80% of Israelis support what Netanyahu is doing, even though they don't support Netanyahu himself, I don't have any hope, really, any reason to hope that any new government would do anything different. Why should I? So I think that's basically where I will leave it. That to me, right now, although the Bund did not lead me to Maoism-Third worldism, this is my second time in Maoism-Third worldism, and I deeply regret having left it the first time, as I have mentioned in previous podcasts. And I only found out about the Bund after I had returned to Maoism-Third worldism back in June. So it's an entirely new experience for me. Why I never knew about the Bund before, again, I think it is because of the power of Zionism. Zionism is so dominant in the Jewish world that the Bund have basically been silenced. Plus, there's the organization, the Bund itself, the original Bund, ended. And this new Bund is relatively recent. But I hope that it will be successful, along with other anti-Zionist Jewish organizations and anti-Zionist organizations which are not Jewish, in successfully ending this act of state terrorism against the wonderful, blessed people of Palestine. For the time being, this has been Mark, by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.